My dear friend, there is a truth that I believe many of us, especially once we've passed the age of 50, begin to feel more clearly. Life is not as fair as we once thought. As children, we were raised on beautiful stories that if we were kind, the world would return kindness, that if we worked hard, success would surely follow. Those stories were sweet and they gave us faith to live. But then, life whispers something different. Kindness is not always repaid with kindness. Not everyone plays fair, and some efforts drain us without reward. I've seen this many times in my life. I've sat with patients in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, listening to them speak of betrayal, of being forgotten, or simply of feeling that a lifetime of effort was not respected. One elderly man once told me, "Doctor, I worked for 40 years thinking I would be remembered. But when I retired, no one seemed to care anymore." I listened, and in his eyes I saw it clearly. The world is not always fair. And this is where a Stoic philosophy comes in, not to make us bitter, but to help us face the truth and discover a new kind of a strength. This strength does not come from changing others or demanding life to be fairer. It comes from mastering our own mind. As Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Master your mind and you master your life. Pause with me for a moment and ask yourself, have you ever felt powerless in the face of something beyond your control? Maybe it was a friend who didn't value you the way you hoped, a colleague who took advantage of your kindness, or even your own family not fully recognizing your sacrifices. How did you react in those moments, with anger, sadness, or quiet resignation? This is why today I want to share with you a series of Stoic lessons that may feel ruthless at times, but which have the power to make us dangerously wise. Dangerous not in harming others, but in becoming someone difficult to manipulate, difficult to break, and difficult to sway. A person who can walk through chaos yet remain calm and clear. I remember one of my patients, Linda, now 68. She used to worry constantly about what the neighbors said, what her children thought, even about random comments online. She once told me, "Doctor, I'm exhausted. Why does everyone have the power to make me feel so bad?" And I asked her one simple question. If you could learn not to be hurt by these things, how would your life change? She thought for a long time, then began to cry because she realized the power had always been in her hands. She had simply never trained it. Stoic philosophy does not promise us a life of endless sunshine. It does not say that if you're kind, people will always treat you kindly. Instead, it tells us the truth. Some people will dislike you when you succeed. There will be times when you are used, misunderstood, or drained and still find no fairness. But instead of complaining, Stoicism teaches us another path to see things as they are without rose-colored glasses and to respond with calm, clarity, and fairness. Imagine this. You're rowing a small boat down a river filled with waves and storms. You cannot stop the waves from rising, but you can learn how to row, how to balance, how to look ahead to avoid the rocks. That is Stoic wisdom, not to erase the storm, but to teach you how to stand firm within it. And one thing I've noticed, especially working with people after 50, we don't have as much time to waste on trivial things anymore. We've spent decades worrying about what others think, chasing standards out there, and sometimes forgetting ourselves. But at some point, we need to wake up and ask, does this really matter? If I had only 1 year left, would I still care about this? The Stoics had a powerful reminder, Memento mori, remember that you will die. It sounds cold, but in truth, it is the medicine that helps us live more deeply. Because when we remember life is finite, we stop wasting energy on the meaningless and begin to invest in joy, love, and true peace. On this journey, I do not come to lecture you. I come to walk alongside you, because I too have spent days in hospitals, sitting with cancer patients, hearing them say, "I wish I had lived more fully sooner." Their tears reminded me what we need is not more time, but a better way of living the time we have left. And so today I invite you to join me on this journey where we will dive deep into a Stoic lessons, ruthless yet liberating. Each lesson is like a blade cutting away illusion, a mirror that reflects the mind, a reminder that you can live with a strength, clarity, and freedom at any age. Are you ready? Let's begin, My dear friend, to begin, I want to share with you one of the most important and perhaps one of the most ruthless lessons that Stoic philosophy reminds us of. Emotions are the driver and reason only sits in the passenger seat. It sounds hard to accept, doesn't it? We grew up in a society that told us to be rational, to decide with your head, not with your heart. But in reality, most human decisions begin with emotion, and only afterward do we invent logic to justify them. I remember a man in his early 50s who came to see me for counseling. He told me that after his divorce, he signed a very risky investment contract. When I asked why James listed all sorts of reasons the market has potential, I've done my research, but when we sat together and dug deeper, he admitted I just wanted to prove to my ex-wife that I'm still successful, that I still matter. The real reason wasn't financial logic, it was pain and wounded pride. And do you recognize this in your own life? Have you ever made an important decision in anger or out of a desperate need for recognition, only to regret it later? I believe all of us have been in that situation at least once. What the Stoics teach us is not to deny emotion. Emotions are part of being human. They are the fire that drives us to act. The problem is, if we let emotions drive, they can easily steer us into disaster. But if we learn to observe them, name them, and then invite reason to take the wheel, we avoid rash choices and words we'll regret. I often remind my patients of a simple exercise. When you feel anger, worry, or sadness rising, pause, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, what am I really feeling? Am I angry or am I afraid? Am I hurt because I feel disrespected, not just because of this small incident? Once you name the true emotion, you're already halfway to controlling it. I recall an elderly patient, a mother, who used to argue with her daughter over trivial things. But when she practiced this exercise, she realized she wasn't really angry about the dirty dishes. She felt forgotten, unappreciated after decades of sacrifice. When she finally said, I just want to feel valued by you both, mother and daughter wept, and their relationship grew lighter, softer. The Stoics called this the art of reading emotions beneath the surface. When you understand yourself, you also understand others. And that is what makes you dangerously wise, not because you control people, but because you are no longer easily swept into their emotional games. Imagine this in an argument. Instead of rushing to counter, you look at the other person and say, I see why this matters to you. You're not agreeing that they're right, but you are acknowledging their feelings. And strangely, once people feel seen, they calm down, and only then does reason have a chance to enter. Marcus Aurelius once reminded us, if someone angers you, remember that you too carry the same weaknesses within yourself. So be gentle before you judge. I believe this is not only an ancient teaching, but also a medicine for the tense relationships many of us face in later life, with our children, our spouses, and even with ourselves. So the first lesson for us today is this: look straight at your emotions before handing the wheel to reason. Emotions are the waves, but reason is the boat. If we let the waves steer the boat, we drift. But if we let reason guide the boat with knowledge of the waves, we go further and safer. My dear friend, after we've spoken about emotions, the silent driver of our choices, let me share with you another truth. It may sound bitter at first, but it can free you from much of life's disappointment. Everyone acts out of self-interest. After years of working with patients, I've learned something. Their suffering doesn't only come from illness, it also comes from expectations. The expectation that others will treat them the way they treat others. The expectation that kindness will always be repaid with kindness. But reality is different. When we understand that everyone has their own interests, we let go of illusions, feel less disappointment, and live with lighter hearts. I remember a woman named Carol in her 60s. She often complained about a best friend of 30 years. I was always there when she needed me, but when I got sick, she didn't even call. Carol felt betrayed. But when we talked, I asked, is it possible she's caught up in her own needs, her own fears in ways you can't see? That's when Carol remembered her friend was preparing to run for city council, drowning in plans and obligations. The kindness of the past hadn't disappeared. It was simply walking alongside her new goals. When Carol understood this, her sense of betrayal softened. The Stoics never saw self-interest as a sin. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Even when I serve the community, I am also serving my own duty and honor." Seneca warned us expecting people to act against their interests is like expecting a river to flow backward. It's simply not realistic. Have you ever expected someone to sacrifice for you and felt crushed when they didn't? Maybe it was your children, a colleague, or even your spouse. If you've been there, you know how heavy that disappointment feels. But once you shift the question from why are they so selfish to what do they really want, the picture becomes much clearer. I recall an elderly patient deeply upset when his eldest son decided to sell the old family house. He saw it as a betrayal of tradition. But after many conversations, he came to realize his son's true motive wasn't money. It was the safety of his own young family, providing a better environment for the grandchildren. Once he understood this hidden interest, his anger faded and he even supported the decision. Over the years, I've learned this self-interest does not mean evil. It's simply part of being human. When we accept that, we stop blaming and start adjusting, finding overlap instead. If I want health and you want friendship, then walking together every morning is the bridge where our interests meet. This is the dangerous wisdom the Stoics spoke of, seeing through the surface whether kindness or cruelty to the real motives beneath. Not to judge, but to live more realistically. Because once you know that every smile, every compliment, every act of help carries a purpose, you become less naive and less bitter. Think about the relationships in your life. Has anyone ever hurt you simply because you expected them to act with pure selflessness? If so, try to see it differently. Their actions may not have been against you. They were simply for themselves. And once you see this, your heart will feel much lighter. So our second lesson is this: don't fight human nature. Learn to work with it. When you understand the hidden interests, you can create agreements where both sides win instead of resenting sacrifices that were never sustainable in the first place. My dear friend, the next lesson the Stoics emphasized may be one of the most painful truths, but also one of the most liberating. Most people do not dare to face the truth about themselves. I have met hundreds of patients in their 50s, 60s, even 70s. What struck me was not only their illnesses, but the stories they told. Many complained about unfair bosses, unjust co-workers, or children who never understood them. And do you know what I noticed in most of these stories? When I gently asked, "And what about your own responsibility in this?" the room fell silent. Very few dared to turn the mirror back toward themselves. I remember a man named Richard, 62 years old, who constantly complained that he was being pushed aside at work. He blamed office politics, favoritism, and hidden games. But when I asked, "Do you show up on time?" he lowered his eyes. When I asked, "Do you meet your deadlines?" he said nothing. Finally, he muttered, "Doctor, you don't understand, they've never liked me." But the truth was, he had been late many times, leaving others to pick up his work. The Stoics called this self-deception, and they saw it as a kind of slavery, because when we avoid the truth, we lose the chance to change. Marcus Aurelius wrote page after page in his journal, questioning himself. Why did I act this way? Was it pride? Was it selfishness? He understood that only by facing the darkness within could he step into the light. Let me ask you this. In your own life, is there a truth you've been avoiding? A bad habit you constantly excuse? A relationship you've also contributed to breaking, but you still put all the blame on the other person? One exercise I often give my patients is simple. Write down 3 things you never want others to say about you. No one else has to read it, only you. And interestingly, those 3 things are usually the very truths they've been avoiding. One person wrote, I'm afraid people will say I'm selfish. Another wrote, I'm afraid they'll see I'm weak. But when they faced it, they broke down and admitted, yes, I can be selfish. Yes, I am weak. And in that moment of honesty, real change began. I recall an elderly woman named Martha. She often complained that her son was cold and ungrateful. But after many conversations, she finally admitted, maybe I've been too critical. He's distant, not because he doesn't love me, but because every time he comes home, he's afraid of my scolding. You see, the truth may sting, but it also frees us from illusions that can last for decades. The Stoics left us with a clear question. What truth are you avoiding? It could be your health, your procrastination, or a relationship that is no longer healthy. Facing it hurts, but refusing to face it keeps you bound. My dear friend, at the age of 50 or 60, we don't have time to keep living inside illusions. This is the time for courage, not the courage to conquer the outside world, but the courage to look straight at ourselves. Because only when we are honest with ourselves can we truly be free. My dear friend, the next Stoic lesson may change the way you see every relationship around you. Everyone is always selling you something. At first it may sound negative, but in truth it's freeing. Because once you see this clearly, you'll be less naive, less hurt, and far more awake to life. I remember a few years ago an old patient called me. He said he wanted to invite me for coffee just to catch up after so many years. I was delighted, thinking it would simply be a warm reunion of old friends. We sat down, talked about family health, the old days. I felt the comfort of friendship returning. But halfway through, he opened his laptop, slid over a business plan, and said, I'd like you to join me. This is a great opportunity. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about friendship. There was another purpose, and I didn't blame him. He truly believed he was offering me something good. But here's the lesson. Every smile, every invitation, every story carries a motive. Sometimes it's kindness, sometimes it's need, sometimes ambition. Once you see this, you won't be so easily bought by appearances. The Stoics lived in the Roman court where every word and every gesture hid an agenda. Marcus Aurelius was surrounded by generals, advisors, politicians, each pulling him in their own direction. But instead of growing bitter or paranoid, he trained his eyes to look beneath the surface. He didn't just listen to words, he listened for motives. And that was the shield that kept him from being manipulated. Look at your own life. When a coworker praises you, perhaps it's sincere, but perhaps they also need your support at the next meeting. When a neighbor brings you a pie, maybe it's to share joy, or maybe they'll soon need your help. Even when the grandchildren flatter you, sometimes it's pure love. Sometimes it's because they want a yes to something. I'm not saying we should distrust everything, no. What I'm saying is live awake. Ask quietly inside, what do they really want here? When you do this, you stop being a passive buyer in the marketplace of influence, and instead, you become a conscious chooser. I recall an elderly woman named Dorothy in her 70s who was heartbroken when she discovered a close friend had used her generosity. She often paid for meals, vacations, even helped cover debts. But one day, she realized the friendship only existed as long as the money flowed. She felt betrayed. Yet as we talked, she came to see her friend wasn't entirely bad, just that self-interest had overshadowed the bond. Once Dorothy accepted this, she stopped blaming and began setting boundaries. That's the dangerous wisdom of Stoicism. You don't live in illusions, but you don't grow bitter either. You simply choose awareness so you can make decisions on your own terms, not under someone else's influence. So today's lesson for you is this: learn to listen not only with your ears, but with the eyes of your mind. Behind every invitation, every compliment, every request, there is always a purpose. Once you see that clearly, you'll no longer be unconsciously sold to. You'll begin to live, to choose, and to act with your own will,